Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Jeremiah Nickel, aka JT Nickel on Reddit, at ProDJKC on Twitter, and I'm super excited to have our Chief Technical Officer from Immutable with us, Mr. Alex Connolly. Welcome to the Ethfinance AMA.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So we're going to kind of do this pretty short because I want to make sure we get good information out there in a timely way and answer as many questions out of the AMA as possible. So Alex, just a real quick overview of who you are and how you came to be in the space.
Yeah, fantastic. So I run engineering and product here at Immutable. Right? And Immutable is a really interesting company. We started off making a game called Gods Unchained, which is still basically where we spend our primary efforts. And in doing that, we've learned a ton of things about some of the challenges that face people building NFT applications of all kinds, right? Games, domain registrations, everything NFT. And at the moment, we're spending some time putting together Immutablex, which is our scaling solution for these things. In terms of me personally, I got into the blockchain space in about 2017. I was initially interested in decentralized voting and being able to do some things like that on Ethereum. But when Immutable came along, the opportunity to work on two of my big sort of passion projects, which are gaming and blockchain, was a really intriguing match. And I think there's an awesome opportunity for NFTs to do a lot of good for an industry which is going to be one of the dominant industries in the world for the next 10 and 15 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. And in full disclosure, I bought a ton of Gods Unchained cards. It was so thrilling to open those packs and then to see them in your wallet. It's just like here was this kid back in the 80s collecting garbage pail kid cards, and now you can have all these cool things all digital and you can trade them. And I guess that brings me to the next thing. Tell us a little bit about Immutable X and the scaling of these NFTs and how they're going to be able to be traded and what's going on there.
Yeah, awesome. So for those, I'll give a little bit of background on Gods Unchained, which is where we started, which is if everyone remembers, 10, 15 years ago, and even up to this day, I mean, Magic the Gathering is still amazingly popular, right? But those physical tradable cards, you could take them with your friends, you could do whatever you wanted with them. Then maybe 10 years ago, games like Hearthstone start coming out, digital card games. They're really convenient. You can play them with anyone in the world anytime you want. You have matchmaking. You can do really cool effects with the cards. But in releasing those games, the compromise that was made is that users lost ownership of the cards, right? So like rather than you owning all of your cards individually, those cards allocated to your account, they can be taken away whenever the game studio wants. There are all sorts of I think you should read some of the licensing that gets done. Basically, you own absolutely nothing of any of these things, right? Which is a real shame because people are spending so much money, right? We started off with the idea of building Gods Unchained, right? And Gods Unchained is a card game where, just like sort of Magic, all the cards are unique, are tradable. You can do whatever you want with them, right? One of the nice things about being on the blockchain is that not only do you have that sort of full tradability, but you can also build things on top of them. You can program with the cards. You can build all sorts of cool constructs, right? And you could also have that same sort of convenience of a game like Hearthstone, right? The trouble that we found, right, and what we found, I think this is a pretty common experience in the NFT industry, is in order to generate enough NFTs to be able to have a properly mainstream game, we see Gods Unchained as a game where we potentially want to be reaching up to into those the millions of players, right? That means that you're going to need millions of assets, millions of cards for people to use, right? Printing millions of NFTs on Ethereum, very, very hard challenge just from the pure scaling and technical requirements, right? We came up with a bunch of ways of actually scaling while being fully on the main chain. We've done a lot of research in how to exactly you could optimize NFT minting and trading, which we can chat about a little bit later. But basically what we realized was that there was a fundamental limitation that was going to be facing us and other games on Ethereum, which was that we needed to be able to scale minting and trading of assets, right? Minting and trading of NFTs. Right?
Yeah, because minting them cost money, transferring them costs money, right? So those two little basic things I ran into is like, wow, I have all these cards, but now I need to, activate them, or I need to move. One of the big expenses I ran into was moving them from one wallet to another because I wanted to get them off of this one wallet address. It costs a lot of money. So this seems like a use case that would help that.
I mean, exactly, right? So it's like, minting is a real challenge. It means that, there's lots of play to earn work that's being done in the space where you just can earn money by playing these games. or game studios are trying to sell these assets, and it just costs them a lot of money to be able to actually turn everything into NFTs, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, one of the trade-offs that happens there is that people start only releasing higher value NFTs, right? Because they're the only ones that are going to be profitable to trade regardless of gas price. Right? I think when during the Uniswap launch, the cost of trading a Gods Unchained card was almost $50 per trade, right?
Yeah.
When gas is at 700 or 800, right? Just crazy, right? And we want to create a scenario where game studios don't have to make those compromises. They can make assets that can be enjoyed and where the games can have long-term sustainable success rather than just like short-term appreciation or anything like that. We want to have millions of people experiencing Ethereum ownership, right, and everything that comes along with that. And what that meant was that we needed to work on a scaling solution, right? And so that's where Immutablex comes in. Right?
And so this is going to will this also help auction services as well? So when people put things on an auction, it'll help facilitate. It almost adds like a ton of liquidity, because if people want to, for instance, if I remember something about if you had 5 of one card, you could forge it into a new card. Well, maybe I just want to go out on the marketplace and I want to grab these cards that are worth a penny just so I can forge it up for the heck of it and have it cost next to nothing to trade now. Am I reading that right?
I mean, that's exactly what we're building towards, right? We want a future where game mechanics can be introduced. So if you want to build a game mechanic like fusing, if you want to build a game mechanic where users have to trade hundreds of cards to get a benefit, even if you just want to have thousands of assets that players can and should trade. Right?
What if this is going to allow people to use playing cards as its own form of currency in gambling? Can you imagine somebody setting up a game where the winner would get this bag of cards or something? It just seems like it's endless now, and it makes it cheap for people to come up and create their own way of using the cards. I always liked the artwork. I always thought the art was pretty. I mean, I just would look at the card. I thought it was pretty neat. And
yeah, I mean, you can see behind me, right? We have one of the cards from our most recent expansion on the wall. I think it's the amazing thing about working at a company which does a ton of 2D art is we get to have a lot of really awesome stuff on the walls, right?
Yeah, that's going to help facilitate more artists to jump in the space, outside of the. So is this, and then I think I read this in the tweet storm correctly, was that this is going to be not just a Gods Unchained thing. This is a toolkit, right? A toolkit that other people in the NFT world will be able to utilize.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we initially started, we were looking for a solution for Gods Unchained, right? And what we really found was that this is a really common experience throughout the ecosystem, where both new projects which haven't released yet, right, projects which have already released, and projects which are being considered by like major studios and things like that are just completely unable to get off the ground because there's this big looming specter of, will we be able to make a profitable and sustainable business model when gas prices are going to have such a potentially big impact on our business, right? Like the variability of gas fees, right, is just such an external risk for everyone to deal with in this space, right? And with NFTs, the cost of that is just so much more than an ERC20 token, right? For those who aren't familiar, like trading one ERC20 token costs the same as trading 1 million NFT tokens, right? Trading one ERC20 token on Ethereum, trading 1 million tokens costs 1 million times more, right? So there's like a linear scaling in the number of tokens that just makes this really, really a thorny problem for any developer to try to solve.
Wow, that's going to be. I'm wondering how many. It'll be a little bit of time, but I think once people start really picking apart the tools and getting into it, it sounds to me like it's kind of going to be, no pun intended, but game on for a lot of these companies, maybe even in the traditional card markets, to start issuing stuff on the blockchain in parallel with a physical card. I mean, that's I teach in an elementary building, but every now and then I ask the kids, or they'll see something pop up on the computer and then they're like, what is Ethereum? And I'm like, oh, it's just this nerd thing I'm into. And what does it do? And I said, well, I was kind of mentioning a little bit about the cards, and I said, how many of you guys play, Pokemon or whatever? And at the elementary level, they come into school with a stack this thick, and I'm like, what's your rarest card? And some kid will be like this, whatever, Charizard or whatever they call them, I don't know. And I said, well, how do you know it's rare? You're proving, right? But he can't immediately find a buyer for it unless he trusts somebody on eBay to do it. Whereas when you have everything just digital right out of the gate, you know, it's instant. And now it seems to be pretty cheap to, you know, buy, sell. One another question that popped up was, what does the bridge, and this is kind of a technical question, how does the bridge from Ethereum to Immutablex work? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think probably I should start with, I haven't really talked about it, a high level overview of what Immutablex is, right? So there's lots of scaling solutions that are out there. You know, there are like switching to a new layer one chain. There are scaling solutions with side chains, with Plasma, with optimistic rollups, with zero knowledge rollups. There's a big list of scaling solutions out there that have different trade-offs that work for different teams, right? And what Immutablex is what's called a zero knowledge rollup, right? Which basically means that users deposit their assets into a smart contract, which basically means they move them into a smart contract on the main chain, right? Then those assets, right, can be withdrawn from that smart contract, right, at any point by the user, right? So if you just decide that you want to take them back out, you can do that. Even if Immutable was completely malicious, like we were doing absolutely everything that we could to try to rip users off or like steal your stuff or prevent you from withdrawing, users are still able to withdraw from the exchange, which is something that really mattered to us, right? I think where some of these solutions break down, I think we can get into that a little bit later, is like actually maintaining the self-custody that users on Ethereum experience. Like we don't think that just because you're scaling, right, means that you need to lose any of the benefits, right, of main chain security, right? Gotcha. Which means not letting anyone else take your assets, not letting anyone else, potentially like hold your assets for ransom, right, and make you pay a fee to like, get them out and things like that. All that stuff, particularly where those threats grow as the size of value in the pot increases, right? So if like the more successful your side chain, for instance, might be, right, the more under threat it is, right? And so there's this really weird incentive that you like want it to be a little bit successful, but not too successful, or you're running the risk of losing all your stuff, right? And so that's like so basically we have the on-chain environment and the off-chain environment for Immutablex, right? And that on-chain environment, you put your assets in a smart contract, you can withdraw them whenever you want, right? Okay, and off-chain, right, we use what's called a zero-knowledge rollup, right? Which basically just means, and I think there's all sorts of like complicated ways of explaining this. The one that I've found, which works pretty well, is imagine that I like got you right now to write me out 1 trillion numbers, right? And I said, all these numbers can either be 1 or 0, right? And then you come back to me 10 years later and you say, look, Alex, I've written all of the numbers out. Here's the gigantic stack of paper, right, with all the numbers written on them. I'm done, right? How would I know that you're done, right? The only way to do it would be, or the naive way to do it would be like checking every single number, right? Is it 1 or 0? Is it 1 or 0? Is it 1 or 0, right? What zero knowledge proofs allow us to do, right, is basically to say for a linear number of statements, right? So each statement might be this number is 1 or 0, this number is 1 or 0, right? We can spend a lot of off-chain computing power, right, and generate a proof, right, that what you said is true, right? Wow. Right? So we generate this proof. And in our case, what this looks like is the statements that we're proving is, hey, you own this asset on chain, right? Now you own it off chain and you've transferred it to this user and that user's transferred it to this user and that user's transferred it to this user, right? Each one of those has to be signed, right? And even if Immutable wants to, we can't generate a proof with fake signatures, right? So we take all these chains, we batch them up, right? And then we send a transaction to the smart contract, which basically verifies each batch of transactions, right? The really cool thing from a scaling perspective is that rather than checking every single one of our trillion numbers, right, we basically check we say polylogarithmic in the number of numbers, right? But basically what that means is like, imagine linear growth like this, what we have is like this, right? So like checking 1 trillion times, you might have to check 20 numbers, right? And so in terms of publishing those proofs, a good idea for people to get some like numbers in their head is like, it costs us about 5 million gas to publish a proof for, let's say, 100 trades, right? It might cost us to publish a proof for 20,000 trades, 6 million, right? Oh, and so there's a clear advantage to the more users who are using this thing, the more users who are trading on Immutablex, the more games which are minting on Immutablex, right? We will be able to have that scalability, right? And that, like the big takeaway for users is even as that number of trades goes up, the security of your assets isn't compromised, right? So like under no circumstances can Immutable ever generate what's called, there's a validity proof, right? That isn't consistent with what we've told you about the security of your assets, right? So like there's a, I hope that explains kind of the difference between the on-chain environment, right, which is like the smart contracts, and the off-chain environment, which is where we generate that proof and send it to the chain, right? We're working with the StarkWare team, which is a fantastic blockchain startup headquartered in Israel. They have the most advanced proving technology in the world, right? And what we particularly bring to the table with those guys is, we can get into this a little bit later in detail if you'd like, but we talk about Starks, right, rather than Snarks, right? I would say something pretty funny. So like, when we talk about blockchain proof systems, there are a few different types of generating that proof, right? A few different types of proof. A common one used in a bunch of projects at the moment is called a Snark, right? What that means is everyone comes together, right? And the big disadvantage of a Snark is that, so in terms of the advantages, it's smaller than what we need for our proofs, right? Which means that it costs Immutable less gas, right? The disadvantage is when we start our prover, right, we basically have to all come together. We have to get a number of participants from all around the world, right, generate a secret random number together, right, and then get everyone to destroy their piece of the number, right? And we need at least one, as long as one person is honest, then we're secure. You have secret rituals in the desert to do this sort of thing, right? That's pretty scary for us, right? So
Australia's got some deserts, man.
we do. So in our case, we're just like, okay, we want to use technology which is going to not require a trusted setup, not require any toxic waste, post-quantum secure, et cetera, right? So like that's kind of the backstory on Immutablex as a whole, as well as that, how do assets move into and out of Immutablex. The big takeaway, super scalable, and your assets are just as secure as they are on mainnet Ethereum, right? Which is pretty important to us.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to the AMA questions. So Maddie 7557, top voted question. Where can we read the white paper with detailed information on how Immutablex is working? Is that just available publicly?
Yeah, so I think we haven't got a formal white paper for Immutablex just yet, right? What you can do in terms of public resources is that a lot of the technology, which is sort of like the Stark technology, right? You guys can look at the white paper that StarkWare put out about how exactly that works, right? In terms of the layer on top of that, so like the NFT specific things, we're likely to be releasing documentation over the next, let's say, couple of weeks, which will give projects an idea of what's the cost to me to integrate with this, what's the guarantees that we're making to users, how are users going to be able to trade in this exchange, right? We're focused, as you said at the start, right? There's an opportunity here for us to use this to onboard mainstream developers, right? And like mainstream developers, that means, companies with no crypto background, right? We want to be able to give them an interface that makes sense, right? Immutable is an API-based protocol, right? So no, you don't need to learn a new programming language. You don't need to learn Solidity. You don't need to learn a new blockchain. You can literally mint assets using an API in the exact same way that you'd be able to expect to if you're a traditional game developer, right?
That's great. Yeah, that's great. It lets people plug in.
Yeah, and that's what we're moving towards, right? But that also means that we want to spend a bunch of time getting feedback from the community on simplification of our interfaces. How can we make it easy for you as a developer to integrate? How can we make it easier for you as a user to use? We care so much about UX with this. We want to make a product where you will get instant settlements of your trades, where things won't be reverted after you set them as they are in Ethereum at the moment, right? Where you won't be subject to gas fees. We want to create a platform which feels just as good, if not better, than trading assets in like an MMO or something, right? That's what we think we can give to users while retaining the custody and security of Ethereum, right? Which we think is amazing.
So I guess a little bit along the line of plugging in, has OpenSea or Rarible or Tokentrol, I mean, has anybody reached out already? Are you already kind of snapping in with those teams a little bit to kind of get this thing jump started?
Yeah, so I mean, we run Gods Unchained, right? So which is our major project, right? So we're very familiar with all the teams in the space in terms of the NFT marketplaces.
I figured it was a rhetorical question, but I thought I would check.
Yeah, as we come to market and as that interface solidifies, right? We're already discussing with the various teams. We think users are going to want to be able to trade trade assets which are inside Immutable on as many places as possible, right? We want individual games to support it. We want marketplaces to support it, and we want to give the Ethereum community the option, right? So one of the big things that was important to us is assets from any NFT game or application are going to be able to deposit into Immutablex, right? If you want to use it, right, and you think it's going to make sense, then we just think one of the principles of blockchain is like giving people as many options as they can, right? And we think that Immutablex is a very compelling option, like particularly with, in respect to things like sidechains. So we're excited to see that.
Very good. Toxonaut, what a username. Toxonaut. There are so many different rollups on ETH. How will composability across rollups be achieved?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. I mean, obviously, the question a few months ago was like, how are we going to get scaling on ETH? And then like there's been so much movement in that space to accelerate timelines, to help things out, that the big danger here, right, or like one of the potential dangers is a massive sharding of the ETH ecosystem so that nothing can talk to each other, right? Because if Immutable's we've got one roll up, and there's also Synthetics is on the OVM roll up, and we have a bunch of projects which are on Matic, and we have like that sort of fragmentation. I think is undesirable, right? I can we'll be honest with each other, which is to say like short term, right? There won't be the composability that we have on ETH where every single thing can talk to every other thing. Right? I think this will be something that we get with time, right? What we're hoping to do is at least inside Immutablex, offer as much as we can for every individual NFT user, so that we can give them everything that they might want, right? And then when it comes to composability across those different sort of layer 2 systems, there's a lot of really interesting work. I can't talk about too much stuff publicly, but I know there's lots of really interesting work being done, both between different roll-up solutions, as well as maybe even like it might be a bit more challenging, but roll up to like side chains and things like that might eventually be possible.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those deals where I'm a simple guy. Like I celebrate these kinds of steps because I think anybody could agree that it's one of those deals where once we solve this, we'll be able to do that. But we can't, they didn't build Rome in a day, right? Everybody's trying to figure out how to get to market and bring scalability on a variety of different levels. Of course, we want all those to be, a composability, a factor, long term. But yeah, it's just kind of neat to see that we could start seeing NFTs flying around like crazy. I mean, I can really see NFT exchanges with insane volumes eventually, where people are basically living a barter lifestyle rather than a money in, money out lifestyle. I mean, it's kind of a mixture of all kinds of stuff that could be rolled out of this thing. It's pretty neat, and I think it gives a lot of flexibility to the markets. Stablecoin replied to that about the composability, said probably the market gravitates toward one solution, and if you aren't on it, nobody can compose with your token, so you'll switch to it eventually, right? It's kind of like Ethereum versus other Ethereum quote unquote killers. Belizeth, what are the unique challenges of L2 scaling for NFTs versus ERC20? And I think you kind of touched on that. It takes a little bit more to do NFTs.
I think I might add something else as well.
Go ahead.
Obviously, with NFTs, you have to facilitate more trade. So in some ways, scaling for NFTs is even more urgent than scaling for ERC20s, right? So like the ecosystem has been hurting a lot more, and like we certainly felt it on our end with Gods Unchained, like because we have we have 7 million Gods Unchained card, which is about as much as every other NFT project put together, right? Because we've followed this strategy of trying to create enough assets that we're going to be able to have long-term sustainability with the player base, right? But I think the other thing that's really important is liquidity, right? That's one of the big challenges to solve with a layer 2 NFT solution, right? So like one of the big challenges in the NFT space at the moment is how do we get more liquidity on these assets? Often it's really challenging to place buy orders. Like for instance, if I want to say I'm going to buy any gold dragon off you, right? I might have to put a buy order on every single gold dragon, right? And then if a new gold dragon gets made, then I won't be able to fill that order, right? So it's really challenging for me to like say, okay, I don't care what it is. I just want to buy a Gods Unchained card, right? I just want to buy a CryptoKitty, right? We've got a few ways of solving this in the on-chain space, right? But they require smart contract interactions, right? And they have some limitations. So things like I know 0x have got some cool stuff, with wrapping cards. I know CryptoKitties, obviously wrapped CryptoKitties is big in the space, right? But that often leads you to scenarios where, for instance, firstly, it costs you a lot of gas, right? to do that. Like if you're wrapping things into an ERC20 token and unwrapping, right? And secondly, it doesn't allow you to be on multiple markets at once, right? So if you want to be, you want to be able to sell your card, either as any three-mounted card, right, or any shadow card, or any nature card, right? One of the things that Immutablex probably won't offer at launch, but something that we're looking to add afterwards is the support for like metadata-based, what we call virtual markets, right? Which basically means if you get a buy order on your, like we'll show you the best price that you can possibly get for your card, right, across, anyone who's put a buy order on any of its properties or any combination of its properties. Like we want to make, at the moment, lots of people are like converting what should be NFTs into fungible tokens to try to stimulate liquidity. We think that NFT projects shouldn't have to compromise, right? We think that it's possible to offer users the choice, right? If your card has been individually, hand signed by PewDiePie and is like, super rare and special, right? You should be able to preserve the uniqueness of that token, right? But if you just have a card which is one of many and you don't care about that at the moment, right? You should be able to sell it and access that liquidity as quickly as possible, right? And we think that like there's a big challenge for layer 2 solutions to solve this. And at the moment, we're working really hard. Won't be in our sort of initial launch, but in a follow-up launch to provide that to users, right? We want to create a massively liquid market for NFTs so that people don't have to make the compromises that they have to make at the moment.
So would that be kind of like you go online shopping and your little honey thing drops down and says, we found this price better on like 3 other sites?
Yeah, we can say, like, we can tell you the market, like the best way for you to sell your token right now. Like we can have it, you open a card in a pack in God's Unchained, and we can immediately find you an actual buy order for that card, and have you sell that immediately, right? And the cool thing about it is, if we try to mock that on chain, lots of smart contract logic, lots of processing, right? Off chain, right? We can do that instantly, and more importantly, we can do that trustlessly, right? So we can do that where like we're saving the metadata properties of these assets off chain. They're able to be used. You're able to publish actual orders so that you don't. Some ways that solutions might have of handling this would be like, okay, the exchange will just tell you that that this asset fills what you're looking for. We can actually make that happen trustlessly, which we think is pretty awesome.
That is cool. Very good. And Belizeth said, he also said, please elaborate on this opinion. Sidechains suck. And switching away from Ethereum to another blockchain was and still is laughable. Yeah. I think that was kind of in the tweet. Yeah. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like a controversial opinion. That's combative. Like I think probably
maybe not that controversial.
Yeah. I mean, the reason that we feel that we want to put that forward so bluntly is basically because look, and this is not to denigrate any of those other solutions, right? Like I think I'm about to go into why we think that we have superiority, but people have got to make the right decision for them and their assets, right? And them and their applications, and that trade-off looks different for every use case and every person, right? Totally understood, right? But from our perspective, the reason that we want to do that is because we want to tell users about what they might be compromising on and what they might be missing out on without knowing about it, right?
Right.
I think there's lots of there'll be lots of reasons that people will tell you to go with we're about to go into a period where there will be some competition, which I think is really good and healthy, right? I think firstly, with regard to other blockchains, right? I think we are really big on ETH. We think Ethereum has enormous network effects. We think it has a really powerful developer community. We think it's the blockchain that's most in touch with regulators. I wouldn't want to be building a blockchain to be an ETH competitor right now. I think even the ones with massive amounts of funding are really finding it challenging, right, to build something which is as useful and as good and has anywhere close to the network effects that ETH has, particularly if everyone's biggest complaint with ETH, which is scaling, is about to be significantly reduced in terms of the severity of that complaint, right? Like I think Vitalik said it the other day that rollups, like one that we're building, are going to be a key part of it scaling Ethereum for the next 3 to 4 years, right? And I suppose just from that perspective, we think that Ethereum is the blockchain which has consistently prioritized decentralization and user ownership over short-term scalability, over quick fixes and things like that. Right? And so we think we're very confident that being on Ethereum is the right move for application developers. If you want to access the liquidity, the NFT spending market on Ethereum is massive. if you want to access the developer community, if you want to do things where regulators actually have heard of Ethereum and will deal with that as a primary option. Like there are so many reasons that Ethereum just makes sense for us.
Right? Good. Yeah, very. Go ahead.
And then in terms of side chains, like, like I said before, there are lots of options out there which have different trade-offs. The reason that we want to like strongly communicate to users and get them thinking about the choices is that like there's real money at stake, right? If you're putting your assets into one of these solutions, right? So just to be clear on what sidechains are, the way that sidechains work is we have Ethereum as the main blockchain, right? Parallel to that, we run another blockchain, right? And that sort of intermittently either commits back on chain, or you can like follow some proof protocol, to, like an exit game to get your assets out, right? The big challenge with sidechains is that, and the advantage of sidechains is like, firstly, you're going to be able to program anything you want, so you can just use your Solidity the same as you would on main chain. That's a big advantage, right? And secondly, that you can get the scalability that you want, right? Because you can actually do high amounts of transactions a second, right? The thing that's really important for people to understand is the reason that you can do high amounts of transactions per second on your sidechain and not on Ethereum is because you've massively relaxed the constraints around decentralization and custody, right? And this will make sense for some applications, it will make sense for some users, right? But we think at least people should be aware that like when they're putting their assets on this, they are losing the security of Ethereum, right? And are having the security of the sidechain, right? And if your sidechain is being run by 3 people, right, and they're all public facing, and someone could go to their offices and steal the private keys and hold every single person on that sidechain's assets to complete ransom, right? That's a pretty scary thought for us, right? Like I said, it'll make sense for some users, but we want to like strongly say like, there will be options for people to choose from, which are presented to them from a scaling NFTs perspective. And we want people to choose the option that makes the most sense for them, right? Which means that we have to like be explicit about the trade-offs that are actually occurring in each of the scaling solutions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it echoes a lot of what Paul Brody was saying about EY. They're focused on the public main chain and nothing else at this point, for all the same reasons, even though EY probably has however many servers in some room out in the desert in Utah, it's still better to go from the most trustful way of doing business is on the public main net. So yeah, good on you. Lawful Tots OG. This guy's an OG from way back. He goes, is this my NFT AMA? Wink. He goes, so far we have some basic third-party marketplaces. What other kinds of third-party applications do you envision popping up that will leverage the tokenized nature of GU cards?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a great question because firstly, it speaks to what we're hoping to achieve from our end, and also it speaks to what we're hoping to achieve from a community end, right? So like with Immutablex, we're going to be releasing this as a public protocol for other people to consume, right? That means that if you want to build things like external applications, if you want to build things like if you want to build things on top of Immutablex as a community website or as a community developer, you're going to be able to do that just by integrating with our APIs, right? And the big advantages of that is that you can build the experience that actually matters. So like, you can concentrate on a particular subset of users or a subset of functionality, or even just building your own aggregator, which presents a better UI for people, right? What we want to do is not just like we're going to come up with really good use cases for God's Unchained cards ourselves, but we're going to put the power in the hands of community developers who have already done such an awesome job for us, right? And external projects in the NFT space who want to build on top of these APIs, right? We want to empower other people to build really cool use cases, right? In terms of cool applications for the NFTs, we ran a DeFi competition a few months, maybe even a few weeks ago, where people could propose sort of like different ideas for what to do with God's Unchained cards. There's some really interesting ones, community governance tokens, and like all those things start to become a little more real once you're in an environment where trading is not something that costs you a lot of money and requires a ton of processing power, but is actually something where people just experience that as a normal part of being using NFTs.
And when the toys in the sandbox are cheap to trade around, you can have more toys in the sandbox to play with and build stuff with. I mean, it just seems like anybody that's ever had a dream or an idea, now this is greatly going to increase the speed and productivity of that, at least so they don't have to worry about, so much about the price and the cost. And some of these, I just see this thing opening up a lot of interesting doors, and I really, I'll be really excited to see how this evolves. Lawful Tots also asks, what is the most ambitious out there, so crazy it just might work, NFT token idea that you all have had? Anything out there, like what's on the horizon? I guess this would be a good lead off. Where do you see things in the NFT market, beyond just what kind of crazy concept NFTs have you guys been dreaming up? But where do you see us? Let's see, what is this, 2020? Where do you see us in like 2022 or so, 2 years from right now in this conversation?
Look, I think there are two types of NFTs that will start to exist, right? There are digital native assets, right? So things which have always existed as digital assets. Things like game items, things like that are a really nice place to, or domains are a really good place to start, because everyone is used to the concept of I own my items, I'm trading them to other people. They're not physical, they don't exist at all in physical form, but they exist in that sense, right? And then there's the other side, which are potentially starting to back real world assets with NFTs, right? So you already see things like StockX, where people trade rare sneakers, the general collectible market, even things like real estate, etc. Anywhere where you have uniqueness, right? Bringing actual proper liquidity into those markets, right, is something that we think is going to be huge, right? And with all the stuff that I talked about before, like that property-based trading, etc., right? I'm sure there will be enormous opportunities for every sort of unique good to be traded efficiently and effectively on the blockchain, right? And being able to do that trustlessly, being able to do that programmably, so that it's not just like straight one-for-one trading, but it's something you can customize the logic to do whatever you want, right? And also being in a position where anywhere in the world, anyone can be on the other end of the trade, just opens up so many doors, particularly if people who are building these additional systems on top of it are not just Immutable, but a whole legion of people who want to build amazing things for their users and amazing things for the communities of which they're a part, right? We think that's an amazing opportunity that, I think if in 2 years we were in a space where, we looked back and we laughed about some of the problems that we had now about scaling and trading and things like that. And it was much more like a public conversation of at the moment, I just talked about different types of ownership with okay, do you own things? How do you own things on Ethereum? How do you own things on Immutablex? How do you own things on side chains? How do you own things on other blockchains? And what are the trade-offs there? We want to be in a position where we're speaking to mainstream people about, and it's a well-known thing that there are different options for ownership of both real world and digital native assets, right? And people are saying, I understand that the assets I'm buying in this game I own in this way, and the assets I'm buying in this game I own this way, right? We don't think in 2 years the games industry is going to completely flipped and everyone's going to be trading NFTs and things like that. It's too much money in free-to-play games, right? But what we do think is that where we'd love to be is to have the success, to enable the success in the industry. That means that every single user is aware of the choice, right? They're aware that there are other options that I could be picking here for my ownership, right? And they can make their purchasing decisions accordingly, right? We want to just get, at the moment, some users don't feel that they're getting the raw end of the deal here, right? And changing that narrative about ownership, I think requires strong projects and applications, things like God's Unchained, right? And strong technology and platforms like Immutablex, right? And that's why we're building both of them.
Well, very good. Hey, I don't know if you have any last thoughts. Tell us about your website, where people can find you. I think you said StarkWare, if they want to read more about that technology that's kind of running. Go ahead and give us your spiel on where we can find more information.
Yeah, so I definitely say, immutable.com, follow us on Twitter. I think there's also a link to a new Discord that we've set up at the bottom of our website. For technical details, StarkWare is a great place to start, but also subscribe to the email list, right, which we have on our website, and you're going to be the first to hear about any public either documentation or white papers or guides that we're putting out, right? And if you're someone who's running a project, or even if you're just a member of a community and you think this would be a great solution for your community, please just reach out to us. We'd love to chat to people in the NFT space. We want to find out how we can make this product most effective for you. We want to find out, if you're a user, what do you care about? We're building up a roadmap which for those next 2 years, right? And we want to find out how we can maximize the value we provide to the space, right? So we're always ready, willing, and able to listen to applications, to exchanges, to individual users. We want to make the NFT space absolutely huge for everyone. We think the best way to do it is talking to.
All right, very good. So Alex Connolly from Immutable God's Unchained team, thank you so much. I hope that we get some people to watch this. It'll be available. Obviously, it's on my YouTube channel. Make sure the video gets spread out. For the record, I did not accept any GU packs for this this interview. I don't monetize my videos. No money trades hands. I just enjoy the God's Unchained realm, and I wish you guys all the best. And I know you don't need it because you're already kicking ass, and just really love this idea of being able to scale up the NFT trading world and making those tools available for everybody. So cheers and big hugs from Kansas City on behalf of the Ethfinance community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you in the future.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me on.
You too. Bye-bye.